Welcome again to our seed library series. Bill Paradis has been speaking on topics as we go through the months, because our goal at the end is to save seeds and have them returned to the library. So he is picking a topic for this time which is appropriate for what's going on in our gardens. He's going to teach us how to weed and
composting, which is where the weeds will end up.
okay.
And if we have time and interest, we talk about succession planting.
And there's refreshments over there.
Lots of familiar faces. Welcome back. See what someone's pulling in again, so we'll hold off just a little longer. For those of you who just came in, today we're going to talk about three topics. We go weeds, which is what most of us are dealing with right now, composting, which is where your weeds should end up, and succession planting. So before we get into it, I'm just going to ask you to raise your hand. Who is mostly interested in weeds? Okay, 2, composting, 3, 5, succession planting.
Let's lift it out.
Start there.
I have.
Okay. So I'm assuming that everybody has some seeds in the ground. And if you started early, which hopefully you did, you've actually got some plants coming out of the ground. And the most effective way to maximize the production of your garden is to put something else in there as soon as something comes out. You have to think about, when you're doing the succession planting, a couple of things. First of all, the plants that are coming out have been removing nutrients from the soil. So you want to, in almost all cases, that's sounds okay. In almost all cases, think of how to replace those nutrients before you plant something else. Now, there are some crops where that's less of an issue, and those are the legumes. So if you have peas coming out, you won't get it. Really, I'm not going to tell. But they will be coming out soon if we have many days like this. So peas are a legume. They're actually putting nitrogen into the soil. So they're a good crop if you're thinking about succession planting. Put in something that's a relatively heavy feeder. Most of the other crops that will be coming out soon are salad greens and small roots. So theoretically, you've been harvesting spinach by now, quite possibly lettuce. Kale and Swiss chard, good chance that you've been eating those for a while. And there comes a time when, again, we have many more days like this early in the season, those will come in pretty quickly. So for those crops, which are reasonably heavy feeders, you put a legume in afterwards. So green beans or dried beans. And as the season goes on, you want to keep thinking about that. This is a crop that goes in, you know the date that you planted it, you know it needs 60 or 90 or 120 days to come to ripeness. And you can calculate, okay, I put corn in, it's 70 days, it's a short season corn, 70 days. Goes in now, it's going to come out in August, first frost is October, so I've got 60 days, give or take, to get something else in. So you look at your seed packs and you find the ones that are relatively short season, and you can stretch it. In the summer, when you're planting things in the summer, you've got long days, things actually grow faster, so their maturity date frequently is a little bit sooner than what it says on the package. But the idea being, you want to put something in that is going to reach maturity before your first frost, or put something in that first frost will be relatively harmless. Kale seems to work all the time. If you want to have something growing all the time, plant kale every week and you'll be fine right up until December, or until we get a really heavy snow, which I also quite like. So the other thing to consider in the succession part of things is you don't want to have the same thing growing in the same place all the time, because that's going to deplete nutrients that much more quickly, specific nutrients. And if there is a problem that you're trying to deal with, be it disease, or pests, or even weeds, having the same crop over and over and over again in the same place is not going to eliminate that problem. It's going to exacerbate it. So what you want to think about is plant families. So you may have greens, which kind of get grouped all in the same family, even though they're not all in the same family. But functionally, they work the same way. They need the same kind of nutrients. And you may have root crops, and again, not all in the same family, but functionally they all kind of need the same nutrients, with the exception of onions. But carrots, beets, turnips. You have the solanaceae, so and these are the nightshade family: tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, potatoes. Major crops. They're relatively heavy feeders. They frequently share diseases. They often share pests. And they also tend to have diseases that winter over. In other words, the spores of the disease organism will drop off the plant into the soil, and they'll be there next year. So when you're thinking about successions, you need to kind of think long-term for those. If you run into problems with a nightshade plant, you want to either not grow it next year or grow it in a completely different place, as far away as possible from where they were before. So some crops, long season crops, you don't have that window where you can do succession planting because, parsnips, you put them in March or April, and you harvest them in March or April. It's like there's never open space in that bed to replant something, unless you have a wide bed and you make single rows of it, and you plant other individual crops alongside it or in between. And that's a really good way to do succession cropping and maximize the production of a certain amount of space. So I'll take the Giving Garden example. We have beds there that are anywhere from, I'll just take some short ones, but typically 50 feet up to 150 feet. And we put in leeks. And the leeks are a relatively long crop. They're 90 days. They're a single row down the middle of the bed. And what we'll do, we'll hill up the leeks and we'll blanch them so we get nice long stems. But it's a 30-inch wide row, and we've got about that much of it that we're using for leeks. So we've got probably maybe 12 inches on each side that we can use for other crops. And what we can do is take one crop, one side of that row, say it's on the eastern side, and we'll put in radishes, turnips, beets, something that doesn't take a lot of space and it doesn't take a lot of time. In other words, it's actually going to be harvested before the leeks are going to be out of there. And on the western side, where we want to protect something that would benefit from the shade of the leeks as they're getting older in the summertime, we might put in spinach or lettuce. We'll only get one cutting off of it because it's going to be hot anyways. But the shade from that for half of the day will allow those crops to come to ripeness, come to maturity, and we can harvest those. And then at the end of that time, we've got to grow leeks again. And those crops will go in and come out in sufficient time that we can actually put in something else for the fall. So we might switch it. There's roots on this side, leeks here, greens on the western side. When the roots and the greens are done, we'll switch them. We'll put the greens over here and the roots on the western side. And that way we're, again, kind of tripling the amount of productivity in that one row. A lot of people, new gardeners, are really kind of guilty of this more than anyone else. First nice day of spring, they go out and they chill up the whole garden and they get all their seed packets and everything that can be started, they put it in right away. And it's kind of a natural enthusiasm that people have. They start looking inside all winter, they're reading seed catalogs, the days are getting longer and it's a bit nicer to go outside. And you go take that day and you go out and you plant everything. And what happens is, June comes along, and now you have 50 heads of lettuce in your garden. And if you're not doing this commercially or have a relatively normal sized family, that's more than you need. And lettuce is particularly hard to preserve. So succession cropping should also include planting the same thing repeatedly in small quantities. And that way you're getting just what you need. And eventually, if you've been doing this, a few years, you get a really close sense of how much you need. Now this is true for farmers too. It's a little more complicated because you want to assume that your market is as big as it possibly can be, so you plant as much as possible. But that means that all of that ground is tied up, and you're depending on being able to sell everything that's there. So if you can split it up, maybe not every week, but you split it up into every 2 or 3 weeks, replant the same crops. So you've got this long succession of harvest, and if you have customers that are regular restaurant customer or CSA or whatever, you'll have a steady supply of something, and you can gauge, this is how much this chef needs, or this is how many CSA shares we're going to fill, and keep that going on a regular basis. Now, some things you can't play that way. Spinach is notorious for, you get a nice good stand in the springtime, you harvest that, you might freeze a bunch of it because you plant a lot. You plant another crop in June, you might get one harvest and then it starts to fall. You plant another crop in August, you get nothing because it's too hot and it never germinates. So you need to kind of tweak the decisions that you're making based on all of the different climatological issues that you're going to be dealing with. Heat is one of them. Irrigation is another. If you're working with limited water resources, you need to think about how am I going to maximize the production when I have these limitations, and then catch up on the other end in the fall when the rains come and it gets a little cooler and the days are a little shorter, and you can go back to that, the crops that will thrive best in cool weather. Again, kale, you can plant it almost any time. It's one of the most remarkable, resilient, productive crops you can do, but you can also get sick of kale. Swiss chard, greens are tough in the summertime. They always are tough, but kale and Swiss chard will get you through. And there are weird ones like New Zealand spinach and amaranth. And if you're marketing, that's tricky sometimes because not everybody is going to look at that and say, I'm not familiar with this, so I'm not buying it, or I wish I didn't have that in my CSA bottle because I don't know what to do with it. But all of the other crops, because summer is so frequent here, there's so much stuff coming in. You can back off on the greens a little bit. Other things like I just sold a bunch of radish greens to a chef, turnip greens. So there are some things that are kind of secondary in terms of providing that green fill, both in kitchen garden or in a farm setting, but they become kind of a fringe benefit. It's like garlic scapes. You're not growing the garlic for the scapes, but when they come up, you want to cut them off anyway because it makes a bigger bulb, so why not market it or why not enjoy it as it is? So think about when you're doing succession, how you can maximize all of the productivity out of your garden by maximizing the space that you're planting. The other issue with successions that I use a lot is thinking about the allopathic effects of plants. So a lot of people in New England have root maggots. Anybody familiar with those? Mm-hmm. They eat my turnips. You'll find them in carrots sometimes. You'll find them in potatoes sometimes, and other non-root harvested crops. But in the roots that you want to eat, they're particularly offensive. One of the easiest ways to deal with them is to plant those roots where you have onions before, or in an area where onions are growing at the same time. So if you have a row of chives, for instance, that's something I'm harvesting right now. If you have chives, that's a great place to put your roots, that if you have root maggots, and they're much less likely to be affected by that. And it goes with almost all of the alliums, but chives happen to be particularly fragrant, and that's what is repelling the moth as they eat maggots. If you have an area where you've just harvested onions, or leeks, or scallions, or anything in that family, that too is a great place to put in root crops, or to companion plant brassicas. Because I bet all of you have seen these little white butterflies flying in your garden by now, the cabbage loopers. So if you interplant brassicas, which they love, that's why they call them cabbage loopers, with alliums, they tend to be at least distracted, if not repelled. So again, companion cropping or succession cropping with those ideas in mind, you're solving two problems with the price of one, basically. Let's do questions on succession.
So with, this is so silly and basic, but with the turnip greens, if you're harvesting the greens, are the turnips still growing? Are you?
It depends on how you harvest.
Okay.
So with a lot of greens, you can do what's called cut and come again. And you cut the larger outer leaves, and it encourages new growth on the inner leaves. The downside of that is that if you wait too long, the larger outer leaves tend to be the ones that are tougher and more bug-eaten or sun-scalded or whatever. They show all of the stresses that the plant has been under. Ideally, there are no stresses, and they're beautiful and delicious, even when they're big. So if you cut them all off, you will both stunt the production of the roots. It may not kill it if you don't cut too far. So they grow out, the largest leaves are going on the outside, and new growth keeps coming from the center of the stem. And there's a little tiny tip there called the apical meristem, and that is where all of the growth hormones for the plant are developed. So if you don't cut that one little point off, it'll continue to produce. But if you scalp it too closely, then you're done.
What was the thing that you said to plant with your cabbages and whatnot?
Anything in the onion family.
Onion, okay.
Yeah. So, and it doesn't have to be edible. There are some really, really beautiful ornamental onions. And I happen to like interplanting flowers with vegetables for a variety of reasons. For pollination, for scent, for another kind of market, and just because it makes it really nice work. Almost all of my beds, when I was farming in Maine, my beds had to fit in between all these ledges. It's not unlike living here, there's rocks everywhere, but there they tend to be bigger. So I had to fit in these gardens that were roughly the size and shape of this room. And usually on the north and western sides, I would have rows of flowers. So that, attracting pollinators, but also it always looked cool. You go out there and it's like, okay, you've got a long day of work ahead and you've got start from walking into a garden full of flowers, and that's just a nice way to do it.
Why the north and the west side?
For the area that I was in, they were the most wind prone, so it worked like a windbreak for me, but also because the path that led down to my garden, you couldn't see it from the road. I was very careful about it. I don't want any visitor. So I built it so that there were trees and stuff, and you couldn't see it from the road. The path came kind of looped around behind the house, and you entered it from the north. So those people who I felt were privileged enough to be invited, would come into it and they were like, oh, this is so cool. And I had, on the other end, typically on the eastern side, every one of those areas that were this size had a row of compost bins. Typically had 5 or 6 compost bins in each one. I turned a bin every day. So that was my kind of, that was where the weeds went to, and that was where the fertility came back from. And the way that I set up my rows, the rows went lengthwise. There was typically a path down the middle that was wide enough for my garden cart. So I went right to the compost or right to the, it divided it in half. So it was easy to access everything. Yeah, it was really kind of an arbitrary choice. It just made good. Anyone else?
When I grow kale, I grow it in the spring and it just kind of produces, I don't succession plant it because it just produces throughout. I guess I could have healthier, more tender greens if I started smaller plants and kept going like that.
It's typically what I do with kale. I start it really early. I transplant it. A few weeks after I transplant, I direct seed in the garden. maybe a few months after that, I'll direct seed again. And then at the time, maybe a few weeks after that last direct seeding in the garden, I'll actually start more for transplants and put those on in the fall. And that way you do get a good succession of growth and you tend to be a little bit more tender. The problem is kale can last for months and months and months.
Mine
And-
wintered over.
Yeah, I've had kale stems that were
Yeah,
this high.
that's why I have in my
The
garden.
lacinato, they look like little palm trees.
Yeah.
I know, and
They're beautiful. But, like I said, how much kale do you want to eat? If you
Well,
have
it
the
cooks
market
right
for it,
down,
that's
though.
fine.
If you cook it, it cooks right down in
Right,
there,
right.
right? So,
So I actually have some, I just built another greenhouse a couple of weeks ago. And, I built it over some kale that had wintered over, which I'm saving for the seed right now. And it's about this high. In the 2 or 3 weeks that it was under the greenhouse, it grew about 2 feet. And it's flowering and producing seeds right now. But yeah, that kale is, I planted it in early September last year. It's going to seed now. And we've got a lot of it, so we've been cooking it. We just cut the flowers off and cook it like broccoli rabe. And yeah, a whole plant this high, lush with greens, and you cook it, you got kale for 3. It really cooks down.
it really does cook them.
But it is, if you're growing for nutrition, it's one of the most reliable and nutritious greens that you can grow. It's really a crop. I think that covers that, unless you've got more questions.
How often do you fertilize? Like, say you have your, you've got your row of kale and it's growing and you're going to keep growing. You're not going to, say you're going to just produce that and not success.
Not succession.
When would you decide to fertilize that?
I tend to fertilize after every harvest for things that I'm pulling out of the ground and putting something new in. And when I say fertilize, I almost always mean compost. Typically what I'll do, if I harvest a bed, I'll lay down an inch of compost on it the next day, or that day if I've got time. But always, I incorporate more compost and then I'll transplant or direct seed. And I want it to literally be no more than 3 days of bare ground. If I harvest something, I want it to be filled as quickly as possible. If, on the other hand, I'm growing something that is a cut and government grain crop, and it's a long producer, if I've got kale that I'm going to be growing for 3 months, I'll probably use a fish fertilizer or a seaweed liquid fertilizer, and I'll do that every 2 to 3 weeks. If you're getting a lot of rain, compost is better because it's going to not flush out as quickly. But I really do like seaweed and fish-based fertilizers other than the smell because they provide really quick access to nutrients. Now there's a downside to that, and that is if you apply it and then you harvest too soon after that application, your vegetables taste like fish and not good fish.
Yeah.
So, and this is important for farmers too. You definitely want to time that application so that it's not going to interfere with the quality of your harvest. Because there's nothing more off-putting than having what you think is going to be a nice fresh green salad and tasting old cod in it.
I went to the beach and collected seaweed, put it around, and found that the squirrels like to eat it.
Yep.
They're there, turning it in their little paws
Yep.
and everything.
They're looking for the same nutrients. They reckon, it may just be the salt. Yeah, almost all animals do like salt. But seaweed is loaded with nutrients that aren't necessarily in good supply from other native sources. And that's why it is used as fertilizer, because it has lots of micronutrients. And animals seem to have some sense of, I need to eat this because this is what my body needs right now. So it's important in one way. And what that is if your squirrels are eating it, most likely it's indicating a deficiency in your soil somewhere. So if they're not getting it from the natural foods that are in that immediate environment. So when they find it, they're like, the buffet is
It sort
open.
of encourages squirrels to come in and mess with the garden.
Yeah, except that squirrels won't do too much damage there. They'll dig, but they won't eat too much. If you find a groundhog eating your seed, you've got a problem. And, there's ways of dealing with that too. Anyone else?
One other.
Yes.
I grew these edible potted peas, and by mid-July, they're finished.
Yeah.
What would be a good thing to put in that soil?
So they've added a lot of nitrogen to the soil. Let's back up just a little bit. Peas stop producing because of heat. If we have a cool summer, you might have peas until September. So you never know. But once you get like 3 or 4 days that literally like this, upper 80s, low 90s, they're going to shut down. So when that happens, what I do is I cut peas at the soil line. I leave the roots in the ground. Don't uproot them. And because of that, seeding is more complicated because you've got that root mass there. And if you're using a mechanical seeder like the ones I brought in before, or you're doing it by hand, you've got some obstacles to work around. But you want those roots to decompose because they have little nodules on them that are caused by bacteria, and those nodules are rich with nitrogen. So if you're talking about early July, you've got July, August, September, let's call it 90 days, maybe 100. There are a lot of things that you can put in there. I would probably do a second planting of peppers maybe, or a fast tomato that I had started 4 or 5 weeks before. Or when I planted my first tomatoes and pruned them, take the stems that I pruned, put them in rooting hormone, let them root, and put them in the ground. So you've got like a 6-week head start. And what you can do by doing that is you're getting that succession harvest of whatever you're transplanting. And you cut the peas out, and you've got something to put in right away. Again, you don't have bare ground. You're not waiting for something to germinate. But that being said, there are lots of root crops that we can put in there. They're a pretty good thing to follow peas. In early July, you can go with corn if you want to grow corn. There are a lot of relatively short season corn varieties, both what we call ornamental drying corn, corn for grain, or sweet corn if it's a relatively short one. So that keeps that going. And corn, you can usually sneak it well into September before it suffers any damage, other than animals. Animals are challenged for that. But yeah, peas, I love planting them. I love harvesting them. They're really hard to make money on if you're farming them because there's a lot of labor involved and relatively low production. That being said, they're one of the most delicious things. I don't know anybody who goes out to pick peas and brings as many into the house as they eat because they're fantastic. They're absolutely super sweet, and they're most sweet as they come off the vine. That sugar turns into starch the minute you start pulling. So they will never be as good as they are right in the garden. But that being said, it's when I was farming commercially, peas were always a loss leader for me. I never really made a lot of money. I know people can do it, but for the most part, people who make money on peas have grown acreage, not a couple of rows. But I would never stop growing until one of my favorite crops, for a lot of reasons.
They're a great way to get kids in the garden, too.
Yes, yes, kids love them.
Well, they're so pretty and they're easy to
Yep.
pick, and
They-
and they never bring any in the kitchen.
Yeah, they never get to the kitchen. But they're a fantastic crop. They're absolutely beautiful plants. They tend to be fairly healthy. There are a few diseases that they're susceptible from. There are very few pests that bother them up here. Animals do like them, but there are lots of ways to deal with that. But yeah, how big are your peas now?
Well, I didn't put the deer fence around right away. I thought I was safe because usually the deer don't come until they get about 4 or 5 inches tall.
Right.
But they ate down the first crop, so then I poked in seeds, and some of them aren't even up yet, and then some are climbing a little fence that I've got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've got a shot at it.
It may not be.
It all depends on what the weather is. At Coogan Farm, we're harvesting peas now. I think they have probably harvesting today, maybe Monday. But there's lots of flowers on the ones that are in the greenhouse. The ones that are outside, maybe this high, and there are some on another row where something ate a lot of peas. I suspect it was chipmunks, because they love them.
Could be, I've got a lot of chickens
Yeah.
too.
They're
And they
notorious.
get around the fence.
Yeah. Chipmunks love peas too. Yeah. Go to composting. Yes.
So are there any cover crops that are worth putting in that aren't producing anything?
Absolutely.
And we're talking about just vegetables.
Yeah. Absolutely. So when I was doing my farm with lots like this, I always had one in cover crops. Always. And you should theoretically have about 20% of your garden in cover crops every year. So every 5 years, everything's gotten. There are a couple things that you can do with succession cropping to do that. And one of them is you plant your cover crop shortly after your primary crop, your intended crop, has been planted. So you're actually growing them both at the same time. You need to cultivate pretty well so that the row with the plants that you want is free. You can get to it. But you can certainly grow cover crops at the same time as your regular crop. One of the best approaches to that I've ever seen was a farmer named Will Bonsall who grows his winter squash. He plants a cover crop. He plants oats and peas. And the full bed, the full plot is in that. At a certain point, when it's time to put out his squashes, which he started from seed, he'll mow a strip through the cover crop with a sickle mower. So, the oats and peas will be maybe this high, and he'll mow a strip through very low to the ground. Then he'll kill that. So he's got one strip through this field, or not one, but multiple strips. And I think he does them 8 feet apart. Then he transplants his winter squashes into those. I think he's got them on 6 foot, because they tend to spread. So covered squashes and pumpkins, all the hard shell squashes. A couple of weeks later, once those have started to establish themselves, once they're rooted in the ground, before they start to vine out, he'll mow the rest of the cover crop. And he'll rake it onto the bed, so it's mulch. So now the beds with all the vines just about to start are covered with a nice mulch, which will retain moisture, keep the soil a little bit cooler, and those plants, when they grow on it, will be nice and clean. They won't be growing in the dirt, which tends to promote diseases. And the rest of the cover crop, the oats will die. The peas will come back. So they'll grow a little bit more, and then you'll mow them again. And typically, if you mow them when they flower, they're dead, you kill them. So you've got this beautiful mulch field, and big, 3 times the size of this room, full of winter squashes, and the whole thing is mulch. Then it's just a few hours later. So there are lots of approaches to that, but the trick is to find the right cover crop. With grasses, talking about oats, barley, rye, a lot of them, if you mow them when they come into flower, you'll kill them. If it's before they come into flower, they'll re-sprout. But that may not be a bad thing. You're still going to get that biomass on the soil, but you're going to have more regrowth, so you have to mow again, or kill it, or somewhat a kill process. If you wait until after they flower, you may kill the cover crop, but you're most likely going to reseed it at the same time. So you'll get the same cover crop back, but it'll be a few weeks later when all of those seeds start germinating. Buckwheat is a good one to use. Again, if you can catch it just as it comes into flower, it's a really good kind of companion cover crop. You can put it in between the rows in your beds, in your paths, put things that are kind of long season crops. You don't need a lot of attention to them. Plant buckwheat in your paths. As soon as it starts to flower, you mow it and you move that over into the beds. So it becomes a mulch, and as it decomposes, it becomes a nutrient source in the beds, and the roots are a nutrient source in the paths. Others, if you do vetch, for instance, it's a really good green manure, but as a cover crop, it's kind of risky because it just takes off, it regrows like crazy. Some of them don't winter kill, so you can end up creating a weed problem rather than a fertility solution. So you need to think about how that succession will work best for you. Now, if you have a heavy feeder crop, let's say you have a long row of tomatoes, and they produce, they're indeterminate, so they're producing for a significant amount of time, and then something gets them. It might be frost, it might be disease, it might be you're sick of tomatoes, but you're done with that crop. So for those ones, you want to put in a fall cover, maybe a green manure, maybe just be a mulch, but you want to put in something that will give you the benefit the next spring. So tomatoes, we're talking about, let's say you get to September. There's very few things that you can put in that ground that are going to mature in time, unless you do a transplant system. But there are very few things that you can seed there that are going to mature in time to get a secondary harvest out of that area. So think about what you're going to do with that row the next year. It's not going to be tomatoes because you don't want to follow a nightshade with a nightshade. But it could be beans, or it might be peas. Now, if it's beans, you're not going to plant them until July. So you could have a cover crop and you plant in the fall, like a ryegrass, and then you mow it in June and till it in, and your beds will be ready in July. If you're going to do peas, you want a cover crop that's going to winter kill. So you might do barley or oats. Plant them, they're going to thrive in the cool of the fall, they're going to die in the wintertime. You go out there in the spring, and you just rake it off, and you've got your beds ready to go. So for long season crops like that, that's my preferred method, especially if I want something that I can access really easily. Something that's going to die, go out there as soon as the snow's off the ground, I can rake off that mulch, which is just the dead material, and the soil is going to be ready to plant as soon as it's dry. That answer your question? Where are we going to go? Compost? Compost. This is my favorite associated task to gardening. Compost is a way of taking what might be a waste product and moving it a resource. I'm working right now with a group in London trying to do some urban composting. I've done a ton of composting on my own. I've worked with a guy in Charlestown, I think it is, who is a mass producer of compost. His piles are probably 150 feet long and 14 feet high. He's serious about it, but he makes a really good product. I mean, you can imagine how many truckloads of stuff you have to bring in to produce that, because compost essentially diminishes in volume by about a third to a half. So he's bringing in literally tons and tons and tons of materials. And he is striving to be an organic compost maker, which means you have to have all organic nutrients coming in. And for that amount of volume, that takes a lot of coordination and a lot of effort. For a home garden or for a farm, it's a relatively simple process. You can decide how active you want to be, but the primary thing is pile stuff up that used to be alive. You want some of it to have been very recently alive, and you want a lot of it to be not so recently alive, to have been decomposing and drying and desiccating for a long time. So what you're looking for is a combination of nitrogen and carbon, which promotes aerobic bacteria to decompose it. So that bacteria needs nitrogen and carbon, green and the brown elements in the compost, and it needs air, and it needs water. Pretty much it, and it needs time, which you don't have much control over. So proportions are important if you're in a hurry. Typically, you want 30 to 1 carbon to nitrogen. They say that's the ideal. But that's really only if you're like, I want compost every 3 weeks. For farmers, that's a big deal. If you're doing a lot of production and you have to replace nutrients on a regular basis, you really have to be on top of it. I literally I built my compost bins out of pallets, so they were 3 by 4 deep, and typically 4 to 6 feet deep. And I turned one every single day, or one of my young high school student helpers would turn one every single day. But we literally turn a pile of compost every day. If you have just one bin or one pile, and you're trying to maximize it, every 2 weeks you should turn that and moisten it if it needs it, or allow it to dry out if it's too moist. If you don't have your pile covered, one good hard day of rain can slow things down. The way you dry it out is you pick the right day. This would have been a good one. Fork everything out in the morning, pile it back up in the afternoon, and that'll be sufficient. You want it to be moist. You want it to be, you want it to feel like a sponge that you've squeezed really hard, or a washcloth that you've squeezed most of the moisture out of. But you know when you pick it up, it's damp, it's spongy. It shouldn't be slimy. If it's slimy, that means it's not getting enough oxygen. If it smells bad, it's almost always because there's not enough oxygen. It could be that you put in something that was recently deceased, which was not a plant product, which that's fish fertilizer sometimes. Or I found a bird today that had not survived something, and he went in my compost pile. Theoretically, in 3 days, 4 days, that'll be broken down to the point where there is absolutely no smell. What I do is I take my fork, shove it in, lift it up, throw whatever it is that I don't want to know about inside, and pull the fork out. And literally, in just a few days, it'll be very rapidly decomposing. So I'm not... There are advantages to having all vegetable compost, and probably the best of those advantages is that it's really easy to turn because it's not heavy. When you start introducing soil, when you start introducing manures, or fish parts or birds or whatever, you get a little more weight, it's a little more effort to turn it. If you're talking about thousands of pounds, there are mechanical ways you can turn it with a tractor, or they have these amazing compost turning implements that ride alongside a tractor. It looks like a 10-foot high rototiller, and it just churns it all up and just drive down the road. That's a significant investment, but that's essentially what you want to do. I know people who compost in sheets. You'll see over here there's a book on lasagna gardening, and that is essentially a slow form of composting. You lay out all your materials in the bed, you top it with soil, you plant right into that, and as everything decomposes, they access the nitrogen that's being produced, not just nitrogen, all the nutrients that are being produced as with things decompose underneath that soil layer. Some plants are particularly sensitive to that. Plants, as they're decomposing, will produce gases that are not beneficial to the roots of plants. Some plants, like tomatoes and squashes, they don't mind at all. If you have rough, what I consider rough compost, which is something that's a few weeks old, I don't mind putting that right in the bed with the tomatoes, and they'll thrive. They're like, just thank you. But greens in particular do not like unfinished compost. They want something that's very mature. Brown, crumbly, you can't identify 90% of what's in there, at least 90%, can be a lot more than that. When I build a compost pile for a small area, a home system, typically what I'll do is put branches down first on the ground. Then I'll put down a layer of brown leaves, and they're not hard to find. Then I'll put down a green layer, grass clippings maybe, and then a sprinkling of soil, or a sprinkling of manure, and keep going like that. Keep layering. The first time you turn it, you disrupt all those layers. So what happens is, when you're layering like that, all the activity is happening right at that interface between those two layers. The bacteria that are affecting the green matter and the typically fungus and molds that are affecting the brown matter are all coming, for the most part, from the soil layer. So they migrate through and they find the environment that's best for them, and they go to work and they start eating and breaking things down. So you want that in the beginning just to have, so you can manage your proportions more than anything else. So you're not building up too much of any one thing, particularly the green, the nitrogen. You don't want to get excess of that because that's what causes anaerobic conditions, and that's what makes it smell. It still decomposes, and you still get the end result of lots of nutrients. It just does so in a particularly offensive way. And you get to that later when you're turning your compost, and like, I'm going to step back. The smell will knock you out if you get that anaerobic condition. So you build it up in layers, and you get to a point, you're making sure it's moist as you're building it, and you get to a point when it's so hot, significant amount of material. The best way to decide when to start building a compost pile is when you look at it and say, that is as much as I want to turn in one day. So I find the pallet bin to be really effective for that, because typically you're lifting probably 600 to 800 pounds when you turn that whole pile. It's a piece of work to get that done. You'll be pretty buff by the end of the summer though. So you want to build it to that point, and then when you get to that point, you have to decide, do I have enough material to actually start another one, to build a second bin, or is this going to be the amount of production that I'm going to have in this bin, and when this gets done, I'll start again. For my purposes, I'm always adding, not because there's all of this stuff, although there is, there's the vegetables that you harvest and the part that you don't eat. There's those rare weeds that have ever come up in your garden because you're managing it so well. There's leaves that fall. There's grass clippings. There's always stuff coming. So you can stockpile it, hold it off to a certain area, and then build your pile once you've got sufficient amounts. Or you just keep adding it to the pile, just bearing in mind that you want things to be proportionate. Finally, you get to the point where you're going to decide, am I going to make fast compost? Am I going to do it actively? Or am I going to just let it happen? Most people just let it happen. It depends. The thing that you should determine for you is how much you need it. You need it once a year. You need it twice a year, 3 times a year. If you're in a major production like a farmer, you always think you need more compost, and it's probably true. If you're in a home garden and it's not very big, it's producing for 3 or 4 people maybe, you can probably get away with one bin that's created twice a year. Every 6 months, you take the compost out and you apply it, and you start running it down. If you do that, the ideal would be you do 4.5 months in the summer and 7.5 months in the winter, because things slow down in the winter time. If you have a big enough pile, if you built it so it's complete in, say, November, the center of that pile probably won't freeze. It will continue to decompose as it generates so much heat. If you're interested in doing it,
What size to keep it going?
for winter,
Yeah.
probably 4 feet by 6 feet by 4 feet high would be the minimum. And more is better, because the outer layers create that insulation. I've had piles in Maine of that size that never froze in the center. In the spring, I had to go out with a pickaxe to get to the center because the outside was like a rock, but it's possible to do that. If you want to do it actively, you want to turn it soonest probably 10 days. Outside, probably 3 weeks. And as you turn it, you're going to see that it decomposes much faster. So all of the stuff on the inside, which has started to decompose and is getting nice and crumbly and brown and moist, and you'll see there's little white fibers in it, which is all the fungal activity, which is what you want. And you'll see all kinds of bugs, which is what you want. And you may, in the fall, run across a rodent that's enjoying that warm environment in there. And even that is not a bad thing. All of those things are helping to decompose all of this material and take it from being a waste product and turning it into a resource. So one of the things that people tend to be reluctant about is turning a pile, because they run into all of this stuff. It's like there's slimy bits, and there's all kinds of bugs and slugs and weird things growing in there. You want that. And what you do is you take the part that's on the outside, you pile it over here. You take the part that's on the inside, you pile it over here. You take this part and put it in the middle, and then this part and put it on top. So 3 of these, 1 of these, 3 of these, 1 of these, until you rebuilt the bed. So everything's kind of mixed together now, and all of the bacteria and the fungus and the insects and all of that were in the middle doing their work. All of a sudden you put them in a new environment, and it's full of more fresh food, what they think of as fresh food, and they go to town. So you had probably 30% decomposition for the first couple of weeks. Now you're going to have 60% decomposition. So you might wait 3 weeks for the first turning, you probably wait 2 weeks for the second turning, wait another week for the third turning. The week after that, most likely it'll be ready, and most of it will be ready to go. So you've made compost in 6 weeks. That's kind of the inside of maximum production for compost. There's a lot more work involved, but you get the benefits much sooner. Now, that being said, all compost, after it's finished, after it's not producing heat anymore, there are lots of changes that happen. So you get a little bit less fungal activity, you get a little bit less bacteriological activity, but things are still breaking down. And allowing it to cure tends to make a better product. Typically what I do is, when my compost has reached a certain point, I put it through a sifter. And again, a little bit more work. I'm actually trying to build a rotating sifter, they're called a trommel. And it eliminates a lot of that. You're still shoveling, but you're not pushing everything through the screen. But what ends up is, you've got a bunch of stuff that went through the screen, half inch or a quarter inch, and you've got a bunch of other stuff that didn't go through the screen. It's still not broken down to that level. That goes back into the compost pile. And everything else, once it's been through that screen, it's light, it's fluffy, it's, I don't know what to compare it to. It's like chocolate cake that crumbles up in your hands. It's really nice to work with. And I take that and I just put it on top of the soil, and I may cultivate it, something like this, and just run it through, so it's just very shallowly incorporated into the soil, or it may just leave it there and let it be mulch. Either way, it's going to, all of those nutrients are going to sink down into the root zone. The worms are going to come up to it, they're going to ingest it, and they're going to excrete it either on top or under the soil level. So it brings all those nutrients down to where you want them, down into the root zone. It makes a fantastic mulch if it's gotten hot enough and killed all the weed seeds that are in it. Even if it doesn't kill all the weed seeds, it makes a fantastic mulch, and when the seeds germinate, you go through there and cultivate them. And if you get it soon enough, you can cultivate them with something like this, which is called a collinear hoe. And all you do is, it's designed this way so that you can just scrape the surface, just a fraction of an inch underneath the surface. When the weeds are small enough, it'll cut them right off. I actually sharpen these blades with a file, but it'll cut them right off just at the soil line, and you kill all those weeds, and they become part of the mulch and part of the nutrient cycle. If you wait too long, go to this one, which is called a scuffle hoe or stirrup hoe, and this is a little more heavy duty. You can go a little bit deeper with it very easily, and it'll do the same thing. Well, compost, if you put it down as soon as it's ready, or in some cases even before it's ready, because it'll continue to decompose. So for tomatoes, squashes, if it's a few weeks young, or if it hasn't cured entirely, you can still use that as a rough mulch. Put it down heavily, an inch or more, and you'll still get all the benefits of it. You reduce the amount of time to wait for it, and for certain crops, it's not going to affect their growth or even germination. For other crops, that breaking down process can affect them. So for direct seeding, finely sifted compost is preferred for soil conditions and for the seeds. So the last thing with compost that I think I need to cover before you ask me questions is, how do you know when it's ready? There are two signs that are almost fail-proof. The first one is when there's worms in it. If you find worms in your compost, you can use it in the garden. If they're not there, it's still too hot, or there are still things decomposing that are creating something that they consider noxious. And worms, they come in when the material is consumable to them. So it's broken down to a small enough particle size, the nutrients in it that are produced by the bacteria and by the fungi and all of the other little microorganisms that are in there are what the worms are looking for. They're not necessarily looking for fresh produce. They're looking for the things that are excreted by the other animals that are in there working in compost. The other thing, and everybody's had it, if you see salad greens germinating in your compost pile, you're ready to go. If you've got tomatoes and squashes, cucumbers in your compost pile, it's not ready yet. It's ready for them, but it's not ready for everything else. So if you see garden crops sprouting in your compost pile, it's ready for summer. Some weeds will germinate prior to what garden crops need to germinate. So weeds are not necessarily a good indicator, but they're not a bad indicator. If you have things growing in there, plants growing in there, the odds are that at least some of that compost is good to go. And if you're eager for it, you can process it through a screen, sift out what you need, and put the rest back in the pile. And those things that are germinated will begin to decompose in that process. So I am a very firm believer in compost. I think that for most home gardeners, that is almost all the nutrient production you have to do, especially if you're bringing it from somewhere else. You know, if you're raking leaves and putting that in the compost pile, if you're cutting grass and putting that in the compost pile, all those nutrients are coming from outside of the garden and going into it. If you're in a farm, that's a lot harder to do because most farms don't incorporate a green manure or a compost feed section for their garden or for their farm. So they very frequently have to have sources from off the farm in order to supplement all this nutrients that they're taking out of the farm. That being said, if you have a good green manure cover crop program, you can probably do 60 or 70% of your nutrients right in the space where you're doing the collection. It's hard to do better. Let's talk about compost. Questions? But very beneficial for the soil. If you can crush them or smash them or make them smaller particle in any way, you get the benefits a little bit sooner. But unless you've used them to make bone broth or soup stock or something, if they've got some kind of tissue on them, you take some risks in terms of packaging and smells and animals and all of that. But that being said, I almost always had, I don't now, but I almost always did have a pile that was specific for those kinds of things. It was like, how am I going to get rid of this dead raccoon? It goes in that pile, and 2 years later, most of them will be gone. And there are major composting facilities out in the Midwest, and they compost horse carcasses and cows. You literally break that down in a reasonable amount of time. And, it's just a part of the natural process. You're actually preserving nutrients. One of the worst things our society does is take our bodies and put them in a big cement box and sequester them for eons. That you're actually, you're taking away from the natural cycle of how things work best in the ecosystem. So you have to make up your own decision about whether or not to do animal products. But bear in mind, too, that every compost pile has billions of dead insects in it. So it's really a matter of the animals that you can see versus the ones you don't, but they're always there. Cheap composting. The Lasagna Gardening book talks about it. If you don't want to go to the trouble of forking things over, you can build a long row of compost in your garden. Typically, people put it on the edge, but you can just move it through the garden. You have a sheet compost with a whole row, all of the scraps from the kitchen, from leaves, from grass clippings, from the garden. Everything goes on that pile right in the garden. And once you get to, say, that high, it's going to be a mulch. You'll prevent anything from sprouting there. You just keep adding stuff to it until it gets to a point where, if it's that high, now things are decomposing from the bottom up, and you just stop and you move to the next area and start building another one. Some people do it trench composting, so they'll do the same thing, but they'll dig a long trench, fill it in with all of those scraps, cover it with soil. A few weeks later, you may be able to plant in it in some cases, but a year later, what you've got is an absolutely beautiful planting bed loaded with nutrients right in the root zone. So, especially when you're building a garden or if you're expanding the garden, one of the best ways to do that is to put a sheet compost down and let that kill all the things that are underneath it. And the next year when you go back to it, you've got beautiful soil. And typically, done it right, beautiful soil that has the added advantage of not having any rocks in it, working with. So it's a really nice way of doing the bed in a short amount of time. There's another type of composting that's becoming increasingly popular, and it's really good if you have no space for compost outside. It's called bokashi. It's a Japanese innovation where you have a small pail and you inoculate it with certain fungal and bacteriological elements, and you just keep adding fresh stuff to it. And it's closer to fermentation, but the same results apply. So you get to a certain point, pail's not full, you take it out and drain off a little bit because that's the inoculant for your next batch, and you take what's in there and put it out into your garden, and it's super rich in nutrients. There are a lot of people who do urban gardening, they have apartments, so they don't have a place outside, and a lot of them do bokashi. It's well worth looking into if you have limited space. Anything else? Yeah.
The leaf compost or leaf mold that they create, I know there's issues around where the leaves are being gathered and all that, but my understanding is that's really just used for organic matter. It's not a high nutrient dense.
It's not a high nutrient source, but it's a very high mineral source.
Okay.
So for micronutrients, it's really good. Tree roots go down deep. They absorb nutrients that aren't accessible in shallow soil. So for micronutrients, it's really good. But you're right. The most valuable benefit of leaf mold is as a soil conditioner. If you have soil with a lot of clay, if you have soil with a lot of sand or a lot of silt, leaf mold almost always helps. It encourages a lot of mold or fungal growth, and the byproduct of fungus is very good nutrients for plants. So it's kind of a precursor to nutrients, to essential nutrients. But as a soil conditioner, I think it's unbeatable. I use a lot of it. Really like it. In a room this big, I might put in 200 or 300 pounds of leaf mold in a typical soil kit. Your question?
Several, but
That's fine. Several's good.
so I have a couple of compost bins. I think they're too small from your description because they freeze through to the center in the wintertime. So I'll have to do something about that.
Are they
But during-
commercially built ones?
Yeah, they were the plastic ones
Yeah.
you get for what, $40
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
town. So I think I'm ready to graduate to the next thing. But all winter, I take food scraps out there, plant-based food scraps, and they end up just sort of piling on top.
Right.
Do you have any suggestions for how to not have that happen when I have a larger
Yeah.
space?
I know a lot of people who use these. A lot of times they're supplied by municipalities. There are some that are barrels that rotate. And the biggest issue with those is exactly what you said. In the wintertime, you're still cooking and you're getting scraps and you're putting them in there, but there's no carbon going into it. So what happens is you have an excess of nitrogen and it won't heat up. So in the fall, get leaves. You see somebody with bags of leaves at the end of their driveway, throw them in your trunk. I do all the time. I steal people's leaves like crazy. Even better is if you have a mulching lawnmower, and the leaves are down in your yard, or someone else's, go over it with that, and then you have a much smaller particle size, and they'll decompose because they have a larger surface area, they'll decompose really quickly. So whenever you have those fresh materials, you take your dry leaves, put them in there with it, kind of layer it on top, and that will eliminate some of the problem. Downside of that
Keep
is,
some of the dried leaves in reserve.
yep, keep them in a garbage can in the garage or in a bag or something, and just take a scoop out and put it in there. You can do it with paper too, as long as it's relatively clean paper, not polyamps or glossy stuff. Most paper will work the same way. Sawdust will do that. So the problem is with those, in doing it that way, you run out of space sooner. So the way to overcome that is assuming we have a kind of normal winter. We get to a point when we know it's going to be cold for 3 months. So you stockpile not the green leaves, not the brown part, but the green part. You get a cheap plastic garbage can, 40-gallon garbage can, and put it outside. And when you have your, whatever your scraps are that are coming out of the kitchen, what I do is I have a little container, a little plastic square container. I jam them into that, put it in the freezer. As soon as it's frozen, I plop them out into the garbage can. So I've got all these little cubes of frozen stuff. And they don't smell. They typically stay frozen for a couple of months. And when things start to warm up again, then you can start adding them to the compost pile with the right amount of carbonaceous material. And then put it back in the floor.
That's great.
But yeah, small bins, they're actually harder to really maintain if they have an active
Very
compost.
difficult to churn,
Yep.
actually.
Yep. I know some of them they make, it's almost like an inverted garbage can. There's no bottom in it. So you fill in from the top, and when it gets full, you lift it off and move it over. And now you've got this pile sitting there. Not the most attractive thing in the world, but at least you are getting that process going. But yeah, if you know, in a typical winter around here, eventually the cold wins. And whatever there was in there keeping that heat going, you just can't beat it anymore. So some die, but they don't stop producing heat. The only other way to deal with that is a compost turning device. It's a shaft. It's got a little lever on the side, or two, that are hinged. So you push it in, and then when you pull it out, those two things open out, and you can lift it up, or you can lift it up and turn it. And there are others that are spirals and different tools. But those are good for that type of composting method, because you don't have to shovel everything out. It's a way of getting everything turned. And it will accelerate the decomposition process. It brings more air in, it breaks things down just physically, and it just churns it up enough so that you're introducing microorganisms which move very slowly to new fresh material. So that's another way to deal with it. But yeah, the smaller ones are problematic. They're definitely better suited to a less active management system. If you can put it somewhere and leave it, it's a little bit easier to deal with those, but they do have a tendency to get anaerobic because it's so easy to put weed matter in there and not so easy to put brown matter in there when everything's covered in snow. So they become a machine over time. What was yours?
My neighbor has a gigantic leaf pile that they've been adding to for years until this year when I asked them to give them to me. So it's huge. Can I just go over there with my garden cart or get him to trailer it over? And does it need to be amended in any way?
So typically what I do, I access those sorts of things all the time. So go over there with a regular leaf rake, rake off the fresh brown leaves, the ones that have not decomposed. Then go over with a garden rake, an iron rake, rake off a little more. Frequently you'll find some roots growing in there, and you'll get down maybe 6 inches below that. It's going to be brown, rich, crumbly. That's the stuff you want. So clear off an area, take the decomposed stuff first. That's the most valuable stuff. Take that, put it where you want it to be. Put it where it's going to work for you immediately. And then take the rest of it and put it either in the compost pile, in a stock pile, so you can use it in the wintertime, or use it as a mulch, as opposed to an amendment. An amendment would be incorporating into the soil, a mulch would be putting on top. But yeah, it's remarkably valuable. You've got it as a resource that they don't recognize.
The rest of the stuff can go in if I have green material.
Right. Yeah. And if you don't, just start a leaf mold pile in your own, if you've got space. Just, you know, and I do this too. I have I actually, with my leaves in the fall, I take chicken wire, 4 feet high. I put 2 parallel rows of it. I put posts in the ground, and I put the chicken wire on the posts. and it's as wide as my rototiller. And all the leaves I get, I pile up between those. It looks like, from far away, it looks like a stone wall made out of leaves. Nice straight sides, it's all leveled on top. By springtime, what was this deep is like this. And I go over it with a rototiller. A couple months later, I go over and it's all leaf mold. You can plant right into it. There's someone right over here who does this too. Literally, like, I think 2 houses down from here. So they built a big cage in their front yard, right next to the driveway. They put all their leaves in it. And just 2 weeks ago, they took the fence away, they killed everything, and made beds. And it's perfect. All their leaves, all the nutrients from those leaves are staying right on the property. They've got this really rich, fluffy planting surface.
Would you have to adjust the pH though if we did that with all the leaves?
Sorry?
Would you have to adjust the pH though? Would it be too acidic?
Typically not. Some leaves, oak leaves in particular, tend to increase the acidity of the lower pH. Maple leaves, beech leaves, they're fantastic. They tend to be neutral. You need to put a lot of leaves in to really affect the pH. It's more common if you're using pine needles. So if you have conifers, evergreens, pine needles, they're best used in areas where the crops are amenable to that. Potatoes, blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, they all love shredded pine. One of the other things I do, which has contributed to my reputation, is in the wintertime, post Christmas, I drive around and pick up people's Christmas trees when they're thrown out. And I collected a remarkable number of ornaments doing that. But I take my machete and I cut the branches off the trunk, and usually I end up with a bunch of poles about so high. They're great for beans and peas. And I take all the branches and I put them through my chipper shredder, and that's what I use for mulching my granule crops. They're fantastic. And they smell, because when you're out there picking blueberries and it smells like Christmas in July, it's fantastic. But that's one of the best free mulches you can get, but only because those crops thrive on acid soil. The leaves, I'm sure they do have a minimal effect, but pH changes very slowly. If you're trying to change the pH in your soil, you're looking at, you put lime down, which is kind of like a typical thing in this area. The lime that you apply is only really going to start creating the effect that you want 5 or 6 months later. And the same is true with the leaves. So if you're in the process of amending your soil and trying to correct your pH, then you have to consider whether or not leaves are the right thing to put down at that time. Once it becomes leaf mold, they're pretty neutral. When they're just shredded, or if they're freshly fallen, or if they're fresh, if they're green, they're going to have a little more effect in producing acidity. But leaf mold is pretty neutral stuff. And it has the added benefit of nurturing fungal growth, which is also neutralizing.
So the oak leaves that collect along our stone walls, those aren't gonna, shred those will still be okay.
They're still okay, yeah. They, oak leaves decompose very slowly. They take a long time compared to others. Maple is definitely the preferred. Beech, birch, we have a lot around here. And oak leaves have a lot of lignin in them. They take a long time to decompose. But that being said, they also put on a lot of fungal activity.
This really
wow.
terrible prickly plant that's in my strawberries.
How big is it?
Oh,
And now it's like Medusa. Its roots go through my leather gloves. It's just, and when I pull it out, I just create more. I don't even know what to do with it.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons I got him that, because I want him just kill it.
This is a flame weeder. It's a great tool. If you're farming with tractors, you can buy them in various sizes so that they fit the roll, and they'll have a bunch of burns on them. The best way to use these is cultivate your soil, let the weed seeds germinate, and when they're like that high, you just walk up and down the row like this. All you have to do is scorch them, and it'll kill them. You don't have to.
Not even percolate.
That's more fun,
Like,
But once plants get to a certain size, they really take
they
a
haven't
lot.
shown up yet, so I'm thinking that we
Right.
can run.
So as soon as you see them, that's when you want to hit them with the flame leader. And there are certain crops that will kill the top, but they'll continue to sprout. So what we're talking about is, again, that atypical meristem. With a lot of plants, the thing that produces the growth is that little tiny tip of the growing point. But there are some plants you can kill the top. Quackgrass is another is a good example. You can flame it and flame it and flame it, and it will just keep coming back until you get to the point where it hasn't photosynthesized in so long that it just has nothing. So you can literally kill quackgrass with this, but it takes a long time. And it's no photos for being hard to kill. For thorny things like what you're talking about,
And I brought it around to different places and said, what is that? And they're like, that is a mean plant. I don't know. It's like some sort of weird.
how long are the thorns?
Pardon me?
How long are the spikes on it?
They go right through my leather gloves. So pretty long, and the roots are prickly too. Like I tried to go under, but when I did that, then it showed up in 6 different places. I created a monster.
Like,
And it seems to like the strawberries. And I was wondering if it was some,
acid environment.
yeah.
It sounds like, right now, there is a nightshade.
You know, I think it might be a nightshade because
Yeah.
I actually had a reaction with my eyes
And it
after
is
touching it.
horrible. It has really, really sharp, fine.
I had touched my
Strong.
eye after winning it, and my
Yeah.
pupil got big, and I had to go to the eye doctor, and they said, "Did you touch nightshade?" So
Yeah.
I know that
That's
sounds
what it is.
weird, but I had my pupil was blown for like days,
Oh,
and they said,
God.
"Did you touch nightshade?" And I said, "I don't think so, but I probably."
So it's related to, actually, this one's Japanese, but I know there are Chinese versions too. You get long, short-handled ones. This is a fantastic tool. You can use it like a digger, stab it into the ground, use it to scrape weeds. You can use it for making furrows. You can use it for filling up or digging trenches. It's a really fantastic tool. If you're on your knees dealing with weeds, this is a good way to go. This one obviously for dandelions, but I'll tell you my favorite tool, and especially for large scale, my favorite tool is this fork. This is a heavy duty. This fork is 20-something years old. It's heavy duty. You can see the square tines, not the flat ones. There's a very similar one available right now at Ocean State Job Lot.
Yeah.
But it's not the same steel. The tines will bend on it if you're not careful. With rule of thumb with any tool, if you're bending it, you're doing something wrong. You're using it the wrong way. So if you hit a rock with this thing, like I said, this is possible. I adjusted that. But if you're weeding a bed and you've got a lot of weeds and they're fairly mature, the easiest thing to do is, let's call that the soil level and try not to stab that cord. Push this down in, rock it back a little bit, rock it forward a little bit, loosen up the soil. And most weeds will pop right out. Even if it's in a bed with vegetables in it, same thing. You loosen it up, and as long as their roots are not deeply intertwined, you can have a vegetable plant that you're moving with the fork. And pull the weed out and leave the vegetable plant, it's going to be fine. You may break a few roots, all that's going to do is grow more. This is my favorite tool for weeding. And the second thing that's great about it is you've got your bed. You go down the whole bed with this. You don't pick up a single weed. All you do is stand up and do that work. Then you get on your knees and go back up the other way and pull all the weeds. Put them in the path beside the bed, and once they're all lined up there, you go through with a rake them up, put them in your weed bucket, put them in your compost pile. If the weeds get ahead of you, when they get to a point where you've got to pull them, as opposed to kill them with a hoe, This is almost always the way to go. Lots of different hose for lots of different applications. This,
What brand is that?
Smith and Hoffman.
It is.
This one is good for if you've got if you've got a row of lettuce, say. It's got 3 sharp edges. So you can push it, pull it, slide it in between the plants. And you can cover a lot of ground with that. The collinear hoe has just 1 sharp edge, but that too, if you have plants on a 10-inch spacing, you put it up against the stem of one, pull it towards the stem of the other. You want them to be sharp, but it'll cut through weeds up to probably a 1/4-inch stem. You've got things planted really close together, diamond hoe. I actually have another one that looks like this, but it doesn't have the diamond. It's just this little narrow piece here. So if you've got them really close together, say you're doing a salad crop, and you planted with a 6-row cedar, so everything's an inch or 2 apart. You can take that, just run it down through the row. It's more like a cultivator than a weeder, than a hoe rather, but the effect is the same. This one I like because with this bolt, you can adjust it. And you can have it so, they're an inch apart, or you can take these 2 out, now they're 3 inches apart, or you can take the widest one, the little one, just have 2 here, and go right over the row. But this one gives you a lot of adjustment, so when your crops are small, planted close together, you can run that right over, so it straddles them, or goes between them. And you've got this D handle here, so you can really put some force into it. So if you have heavier soil, it's really easy to make a good pull. You can get more mature weeds out with this than you can with this with the same amount of effort.
Okay, we're gonna run out of film